they are young adults, and they are mocking him because they are idolaters, and someone who is in tune with the covenant of Moses and bringing his message to them. Rather than receiving him as a prophet of God, they mock him.
Okay, so people can be reading along through the Old Testament, Elisha's walking around, and then all of a sudden you have something that's like, wow, like that sounds really bizarre. And again, I really wanted to bring this one up with you because this is something you see on TikTok all the time. And by the way, I don't recommend people go on TikTok. I was doing that for research. I'm really glad I'm not doing that research anymore. And, so I'm not advocating people go on TikTok, but you just, that this is where deconstruction is largely happening, is TikTok, Instagram, different social media platforms. And the Elisha and the two bears story just gets a lot of airtime in the deconstruction movement. So I'm going to read that for the sake of our listeners, and then let you comment on it, because there is there's a lot going on in this passage that may not be clearly evident to our modern minds right off the bat. So this is from 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 23 through 25. And it says, "Then he went up from there to Bethel, and as he was going up by the way, young lads came out from the city and mocked him and said to him, 'Go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head.' When he looked behind him and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 female bears came out of the woods and tore up 42 lads of their number. And then he went from there to Mount Carmel, and from there he returned to Samaria." So often on TikTok, it said, hey, a bunch of little kids, little baby kids came up to Elisha and made fun of his bald head, and then God had them torn apart and mauled to death. So is that what was going on?
Well, it's a lot of times this is portrayed as though these are kids on the playground, and they're
Right.
teasing the prophet, and so this is a cranky old prophet. And Greg Boyd would say, well, Elisha is misusing the power that God has given to him. He calls it semi-autonomous power, and so the power that God gives to prophets and apostles for good, they can misuse that power for their own fallen purposes. Well, it's helpful to step back and see what the broader context is. One, these are not little kids, 5, 6 years old on the playground, teasing a prophet or mocking him. These are young, unmarried men who are of marriageable age, but just don't have households of their own. For example, the same term is used for Solomon, same term is used for David before he's about to fight against Goliath. So someone who can handle his own, who's very responsible, knows what's going on. Secondly, you also have mentioned in Leviticus 26, there are blessings and curses that come with the obedience to the law or disobedience against the law. And if you disobey the law, God says, I will send wild animals and you will be bereft of your children. So God is warning against that. If you're going to follow after, commit idolatrous practices, these are the consequences. God has sent his warning. Well, what happens? Well, of course, we know about Elijah going up in chapter 1 of 2 Kings. He's gone up, go on up, where we get that go on up, Baldy. Also, Elijah was a hairy man. Apparently, Elisha was not as hairy, so he looked bald by comparison. And you also have Elisha, who has just gone to Jericho, where they had the contaminated waters, and through Elisha's intervention, he made the waters drinkable again. And it says the land had been unfruitful. That's the same word that is used for bereft. The land had been bereft of fruit. Same word that's used from Leviticus 26. Well, you get to Bethel, which is a center, a hotbed of idolatry. You have these young men who are probably part of the royal house and the priestly house, a combination that they know better. They are young adults, and they are mocking him because they are idolaters, and someone who is in tune with the covenant of Moses and bringing his message to them. they, rather than receiving him as a prophet of God, they mock him. And so these 42 youths, they are mauled because this is exactly what God said would happen. You will, God will send wild beasts, and you will be bereft of your children. So this has been promised by God. It's part of a covenant violation. And so these are the sorts of things that are to be expected when people go astray from God's commands and disobey him. So it's not a cranky prophet who's being called baldy. It is someone who is using the power of God in keeping with the covenant of God, that the curses will come if you do these sorts of things. So that's the basic gist. I say more about it than that, but wanted to give just a broad overview of what's going on there.
Yeah, and I think stories like that are meant to, I think, make us from this side of the cross really appreciate the grace that that has been offered to us, unmerited favor. We don't deserve God's grace and mercy, yet he gives it anyway.